You can say that again.
I wondered if people knew how important Kenny would be when that first aired. Today, if you ask a random person on the street who they think is the most popular character on South Park, they'd probably say, I don't know, I don't really watch that show. But if they did watch the show, they'd most likely say Cartman, or Randy, or someone obvious like that. But if you ask a diehard South Park fan who their favorite character is, it's almost always Kenny. Somehow, over the years, Kenny went from being the least significant character on the show to being the fan favorite. This is something I've noticed in my comment sections, on forums like Reddit, on Discord. It seems that Kenny is unanimously beloved by the hardcore fans of South Park. And this is something that I've always found fascinating. How is it that Kenny is able to win so many of the fans over? Actually, I'm lying. I totally already know because Kenny is my favorite character too, but for the sake of this intro, it sounds better if I frame it like a new discovery. Anyways, in order to get to the bottom of this, I did what no YouTuber should ever do. I watched every single episode of the show and took notes on everything related to Kenny. Yeah, that's why this video is so massive and took me so long, because I literally went all in on this thing to bring you the ultimate Kenny deep dive. My goal was simple: examine how Kenny was written from beginning to end, and document the way he grew as a character. We're gonna talk about how his personality developed, how his writing changed over time, and pretty much everything there is to know about Kenny. So call up your local raisins, order yourself some wings, because this video is gonna be a goddamn movie. And it all starts with the first 5 seasons of the show, or what I like to call the early years. I'd like to start this video off by asking you all a question about Kenny. A question that only the truest fans of the show would know. Cause let me tell you, this one's a doozy. It'll knock your socks off. It's a straight up humdinger. So are you ready? Okay. What's the first real thing we learn about Kenny as a character? And I don't mean his muffled voice or the fact that he dies in every episode, because those are more like running gags than character traits. But I mean, what is the first thing we learn about Kenny that makes him distinctly different from the other boys? Take a moment to think this through. I'm guessing that like 80% of you probably answered that he's poor. He's the poor one. And the other 20% now have cancer. Sorry, it's not my choice. Those are just the rules. But yeah, most people tend to think that the first thing we learn about Kenny is that he's poor, especially since it's such a defining character trait of his throughout the show. But that's actually not true. When South Park first started, the audience watching the show had no idea that Kenny was poor. In fact, we don't even hear that he's poor until around the halfway point of season 1. And that's because in the first few episodes of South Park, Kenny's defining trait was that he's really into sex.
What's a dildo, Kenny?
Yeah, Kenny was the dirty one. At a time when the boys were still pretty innocent and naive, Kenny was the one that seemed to have access to adult knowledge. And that was his first notable personality quirk. When the boys wanted to know something about sex, Kenny usually had the answer. When they wanted to know about dildos, he was there. When they wanted to know what a vas deferens was, he was there. And that's usually how his muffled voice came into play. Because by making him incomprehensible, they were able to say all this graphic and sexual stuff without actually saying it. Like how in the intro, he's singing about liking big titties and deep vaginas. Or, well, let me just play the clips for you. See what I mean? Kenny was a horny little freak back in the day. They hid that shit everywhere. Now today, the show doesn't really lean into the muffled voice thing as hard as it used to, and if anything, he's gotten easier to understand over the years. But back when South Park first started, you had to guess what he was saying based on the reactions of the other characters. It was all about context. That's why, even though he didn't say much, and he rarely joined in on all the swearing and ripping on each other that the other boys were doing, when he did speak, they made sure to go out of their way to highlight it. And what it almost always came back to was his dirty little mind.
Maybe you can kiss her, or slip her the tongue. What? How do you know she has a cat?
Now back in that first run of episodes, the show was obviously still figuring out its characters, so while they had some of the core ideas down, they didn't seem to really know where they were gonna go with them yet, which is a really astute observation, I know. I'm a genius for that one. But even though the characters were still in their super early forms, for the most part, the way they were written was very consistent. Trey and Matt have always been very good about making a decision and then sticking by it for the foreseeable future. So when they established something, they built off of it over time. You could actually see this from the Christmas shorts that came out before the show itself. Things like the name calling, the I learned something today speeches, Kenny dying, those all started with the shorts before the real pilot was ever made. And so naturally, that approach played a pretty big role in developing the characters of the show, especially Kenny. So since that first episode pegged Kenny as the raunchy and obscene one of the group, that very quickly defined how they wrote him in future episodes. I mean, just look at season 1 and you'll see what I mean. Everything we learn about Kenny feels like an extension of that initial character trait. You really get the sense that they ask themselves, why is Kenny so aware of sex and adult stuff? Only to decide that the answer is, because he's a degenerate. Now, to be clear, when I say degenerate, I don't just mean that he consumes adult content or whatever, though let's be real, Kenny's a gooner for sure, but I mean that in those early season 1 episodes, they introduced the idea that Kenny will do and say things that most adults would find disgraceful or disgusting, which first comes up in episode 3 when the boys go on a hunting trip with Jimbo and Ned. In that episode, you'll see him doing stuff like drinking gasoline out of a canister to emulate the adults around him drinking beer, or all the foul stuff he says that everyone keeps saying is incredibly gross.
Ho ho! That's disgusting!
Now, what I find interesting about these moments is that while they clearly derive from Kenny's starting point in episode 1, they open him up to new possibilities. Like, for example, I would say that Kenny is shown to be pretty open-minded throughout the series, at least when compared to the other 3 boys. And you can see the seeds of that forming in this hunting trip episode. He's not as hesitant as the other 3 boys to take Jimbo's advice. Even the gasoline drinking thing only happens because Jimbo encourages them to try alcohol. So it's interesting to see how these little details end up forming the Kenny we know today. We also see early signs of Kenny's tough side and his willingness to defend himself, like how he immediately punches Cartman back after Cartman starts messing with him, showing that he doesn't easily take shit from people, which is also arguably an early sign that he has a sense of justice and is willing to defend it, something that's relevant to later in the show when he dons his Mysterion persona. So while these moments can be subtle, they collectively broaden how we see Kenny and how he evolves as the show progresses. So basically, that's exactly how we end up with Kenny being the poor kid. It all just starts through a quick joke with Cartman in the episode Pink Eye.
Kenny's family is so poor that yesterday they had to put their cardboard box up for a second mortgage.
Now, this seems like a good as time as ever to mention the fact that Kenny is apparently based off a real person that Trey Parker knew as a kid. Yes, there was a real Kenny who was actually named Kenny, and he wore a big orange parka that muffled his voice, and he was poor. It doesn't really change anything about this video, but I just thought it was cool and that I should tell you. But anyways, even though for the entirety of Pink Eye, Kenny was basically brain dead, that small little reveal we get from Cartman ripping on him introduces us to the idea that Kenny is a poor kid from a poor family. Spare him his life from this monstrosity. And that sets us up for the next episode, Starvin' Marvin, which gives us our first real look into Kenny's home life and how it differs from everyone else in South Park. Like how his house looks like total with the broken car in the driveway, the fire in the garbage can, the garage door that's falling off, the cracked walls, the tires and couches in the lawn. And don't forget the stray dogs and cats everywhere. But most importantly, this episode introduces us to his family, which gives us our first bit of insight into why Kenny's personality is the way that it is. Though, to be fair, it's more like a glimpse than a proper introduction, because we don't really get a full picture until future episodes of the show. But still, that glimpse of Kenny's parents, Stuart and Carol, does give us some context into what they're like, which it actually achieves through their character models. Because not only do they look run down and dirty, which already gives us the impression that they don't take great care of themselves, but we can see that Carol is wearing an I'm with Stupid shirt while Stuart is holding a bottle that looks like alcohol. And this really fits with the tendencies we see from them much later in the series. Stuart is an alcoholic and Carol is usually putting him down with her words. Now technically we don't know the full extent of that yet, but this appearance gives us an idea of what to expect. Kenny's parents aren't great role models and his house sucks, so it kind of makes sense that he's willing to do things like drink gasoline or distract himself with adult content. It's all built into what makes him different from the other boys. But of course, those concepts only get fleshed out as the show continues. For now, Starvin' Marvin mainly acts as the jumping off point, just like how it also introduces us to what is now a staple dynamic between Kenny and Cartman, which is the ongoing joke of Cartman ripping on him and his family for being so poor.
Here you get to eat all you want for only $6.99. That's why we all come here on Tuesday nights. Except for Kenny's family, because to them, $6.99 is 2 years' income.
Now obviously, from this episode forward, poverty becomes the defining trait for Kenny as a character. He's the poor one now, and being a horny degenerate is just secondary to that. Well, that and the fact that he's the one who dies all the time, which I should probably just talk about now to get it out of the way, so do you guys mind if I take a little detour real quick? Now many people don't know this, but Kenny dying was actually also something that came from the real Kenny that Trey Parker knew as a kid. Because apparently, one day he just died in front of everyone, and Trey Parker yelled, "Oh my god, they killed Kenny!" while a bunch of rats came and feasted on his corpse. Okay, fine, I made that last part up. But the real Kenny did inspire the dying gag, because apparently he would just disappear from school randomly, causing people to joke that he died, only for him to suddenly return a few days later like nothing happened, creating the running joke that the real Kenny would die and come back to life every other week. But yeah, obviously, Kenny dying is more iconic than him being poor. In fact, it's one of the most iconic things in all of South Park. But you know, don't take my word for it, I got a clip to prove it.
All the way up until then, you know, whatever this was, like our second year or third year, it was like everywhere we went, it was always like, oh, you killed Kenny.
And I think it's not hard to see why Kenny dying became so popular, because the way he died in each episode was always so gruesome and violent, which made it stand out in an already shocking show. It was kind of like Itchy and Scratchy, but it happened to one of the main characters every week. So yeah, naturally, it became something that the fans would look forward to with each new episode. It was expected, which quickly turned it into a meta gag for the show. Yeah, even as early as season 1, the show was starting to become self-aware about these kinds of running gags. Like for example, in the first Mr. Hanky episode, which is only the 9th episode of the entire show, one of its main running jokes is that Kenny is constantly given these extremely dangerous tasks that we expect to kill him. He's gotta pull cords out of a wall next to a big puddle. He's gotta climb a ladder to retrieve a star that's hanging over a pool of bloodthirsty sharks. He's gotta weave through these flesh-burning laser beams to get Santa's hat, which totally happened in the episode, you just don't have the real version. But yeah, the point is that in this episode, none of those death traps actually kill Kenny. Instead, the joke is that he lives, which of course subverts the audience's expectations because his deaths had already become such a staple of the show. And you might think I'm getting way too in the weeds here for a detour about Kenny dying. I mean, I'm talking about a gag from a single episode here when I'm supposed to be doing a whole ass biography, but that meta perspective actually changed how they wrote Kenny as a character too, because by making him so disposable and being so self-aware about it, he became the perfect candidate to do all the dangerous and challenging stuff that was necessary to move the plot forward. It was almost as if that meta writing style turned him into this built-in Deus Ex Machina for the boys. Anytime something big needed to happen to save the day, they would just throw in Kenny because he's expendable, which even led to Kenny becoming self-aware about his own deaths in that first season. Like going back to that Mr. Hanky episode, when it finally ends, Kenny cheers as a big block of text reading "The End" materializes at the top of the screen, suggesting that he's happy to have survived an episode for once. Now obviously, when that episode was first made, it was just meant to be a fun little joke and nothing more, but in retrospect, with everything we know now, it feels like a super early precursor to the Mysterion trilogy, which is kind of crazy considering how early in the show this was. Anyways, in honor of Kenny dying in this little detour, here's a montage of some of my favorite death sequences.
Hold still, Kenny. Oh my goodness, you killed Kenny. Bastard.
Nothing like a little cartoon violence to keep that viewer retention going. Anyways, by the end of season 1, Kenny's basic traits had loosely been established. He's poor, he's a degenerate, he's horny, and he dies a lot with some level of self-awareness about it. Now obviously, it's kind of expected that a character's basic traits would be in place by the end of a show's first season, but I think it's important to remember that due to his lack of actual dialogue, Kenny spends the entire time in a supportive role throughout these episodes. Like, he doesn't have any real agency in these stories, he's kind of just along for the ride. He adds flavor, but he's not the main ingredient, you know? So it's only natural that his character development happened at a much slower pace than the other boys. Like, I think it would be fair to say that where Kenny was by the end of season 1 is similar to where the other boys were after the first few episodes, and that sort of lagging behind is consistent with how his character develops throughout this era of the show. But after that first season, with those basic pieces in place, we start to get some real refinement of Kenny as a character in season 2, which is where they really start to flesh out everything that they established in season 1. Like, for example, if season 1 made it known known that Kenny was poor, season 2 went out of its way to really drive that point home. We see him chasing after dollar bills, stuffing turkey into a plastic bag to bring home to his family on Thanksgiving. He's got food stamps on him at the Cow Days festival. He's got to share blankets with his family when it's cold in the house. And I swear, in season 2, they really make a point of highlighting how absolutely crappy his house is.
Where is the Nintendo?
We don't have a Nintendo. We got a ColecoVision plugged into the black and white TV.
Oh my god, this is like a third world country.
Yeah, guys, it's f***ed. There's no Nintendo. Wait a second. A Switch 2 costs $630 Canadian. Carry the 1. Oh my god, I can't afford Nintendo either. Does that mean I'm broke?
In the ghetto.
Now naturally, with all the emphasis on Kenny being poor, we also get more jokes of Cartman ripping on him for it, which is what really starts to make this into a recurring gag, cause man, it happens a ton from here on out. They may have introduced it in Pink Eye, but season 2 solidifies it as the recurring joke between them, which by the way, continues into the modern seasons of South Park. So you know, consistency and sitch. But yeah, this all comes hand in hand with learning more about Kenny's family and how they're portrayed in this very over-the-top manner. Like we see that Stuart blames others for their financial situation while Carol blames him for being a drunk, or that she beats him and he beats her back in front of Kenny and his brother, which is pretty f***ed. I mean, they seem to find it funny, but still, their lives are just really crappy. They eat frozen waffles for dinner. The oldest brother, Kevin, is even stupider than the parents. They have rats in the house, ripped up window curtains, a clapper light. Actually, wait, that last part's pretty sweet. But yeah, the point is that the show really does what it can to drive home the fact that Kenny's home life sucks in pretty much every possible way. Like, they can't afford anything. And this is before Kenny's younger sister Karen was added in, which presumably only made their financial situation worse. But interestingly, as the show pushes more into that poverty direction, it seems to take a few steps away from Kenny's obscene and degenerate side. At least as far as this era is concerned. Because one of the biggest things I noticed about season 2 is that when the show isn't making jokes about his poverty, we tend to get scenes that highlight Kenny's more positive qualities. Like, remember how I mentioned that in season 1, Kenny was starting to become the helpful one of the group because he's so expendable? Well, season 2 really reinforces that concept by making it his default behavior. Like, for example, when Cartman is gonna get gored by a bull, the boys ask Kenny to intervene, and his initial reaction is to do it before realizing that it might kill him. Or when Cartman asks him for a glove to wipe his ass, Kenny almost gives it to him as an automatic response. When the boys need money to go on a carnival ride, Kenny gives up his food stamps. When he and Cartman are making a clubhouse, Kenny does all the work ripping up the carpet that they use. I mean, he does it begrudgingly, but still, he does it. And of course, my all-time favorite example of Kenny being helpful in this season, when the power goes out at the hospital and Team B has to go on a deadly mission to bring it back. Can ya guess who Team B is? That's right, it's Kenny.
It will be a cold and dangerous climb to the top, and there could be velociraptors here. Once you reach the top, you should be able to get a clear view through this window of us drinking cocoa and watching television. Are there any questions?
Yeah, the show kind of makes Kenny its bitch in the early years. He has to do all the hard, dangerous stuff that our precious other main characters can't do. And if something bad can happen to him or his family, oh, you best believe it's gonna happen. Because the McCormicks are basically just the punching bags of South Park. Like, do Kenny's parents deserve to be beaten by Cartman with a baton? No. Well, maybe. But the show was gonna do it either way, because this season wastes no opportunity to punish Kenny and his family for a laugh. But having said that, the big trade-off here is that by becoming a bigger punching bag, Kenny gets to be a bigger part of the show in general. He expresses himself more, there are more gags that focus on him, he has more dialogue. I mean, we can't understand it, but there's more of it. And one of the byproducts of this increased prominence is that the show begins to pair Kenny with Cartman in a way that feels similar to how they pair Stan with Kyle. Not that they're explicitly best friends in season 2 or anything, but we start to see the friend group subtly make that distinction. Honestly, it's probably because Stan and Kyle were meant to be a pair, so bringing Cartman and Kenny together just was the logical thing to do. But still, we get moments like the Clubhouse episode where Kenny and Cartman team up against Stan and Kyle, which at least implies that Cartman has a preference for Kenny over the other two. So to me, it feels like season 2 was planting those seeds about their friendship. And then season 3 is where it officially starts to grow. Because in season 3, not only do Kenny and Cartman get paired up more frequently, but the characters start doing it by by choice. Like how Kenny joins him on his quest to defeat the North in the episode Red Badge of Gayness, or how Kenny helps Cartman find the brown noise in Worldwide Recorder Concert. You really start to get the sense that they have a preference for each other over Stan or Kyle. And that's not even including examples like the special club they start when they both get their periods, which is totally normal because they're beautiful goddesses. And this is reflective of how season 3 is in general, because if season 2 refined what we learned about Kenny, then season 3 is where those ideas really started to mature. And of course, most notably, season 3 is where they begin writing stories just for him. Stories where Kenny gets to have his own side plots and conflicts that aren't just inconsequential gags. Starting with the very first episode of the season, Rainforest Schmainforest.
Come on, Benny! Breathe! Breathe, you son of a bitch! Whoa, dude!
The Kenny and Kelly storyline from this episode is the first time that Kenny gets his own unique story beats in an episode of South Park. And when I say unique story beats, I mean that we have Kenny making his own decisions in a side plot that's independent from what the other three boys are doing. This isn't Kenny following along with them or being a sidekick. This isn't just a quick one-off gag. This is Kenny pursuing a girl that he's interested in and carrying that side plot all on his own. And it's a fitting side plot for him because the show has already established his interest in girls, so him wanting to be Kelly's boyfriend feels like an extension of that. And watching him get frustrated over her constant flip-flopping ends up being a very funny and satisfying first ever mini plot. Plus it does a good job of distinguishing him from the other boys who are noticeably less interested in girls. Like even Stan, who crushes on Wendy from the first episode of the show. He doesn't seem to have the same level of interest in relationships that Kenny does. Probably because Stan and Wendy feel more like a typical elementary school romance, while Kenny's motivation is that he's a horny little bastard. But still, you get the sense that he really wants to be Kelly's boyfriend in a way that the other boys just wouldn't. I mean, the dude even tries to protect her from bullets at one point. You don't see Stan doing like that for Wendy, though that probably has more to do with Kenny's heroic nature than anything else, but we'll get to that in just a minute. But yeah, that deeper desire for a relationship is a solid step forward for Kenny's character. It shows that they were starting to branch out with the kind of stories they were writing for him, especially when you consider how little the show had done with him up until that point. Because I mean, for all of season 2, he was just the poor kid that happened to be helpful sometimes. And like, that was basically it. But season 3 is where we start to get side stories like his relationship with Kelly, or episodes like Tweak vs. Craig, which focus entirely on his fear of death, playing into that meta angle once again while still making it into a proper Kenny side plot. It shows how Kenny is afraid to join shop class because of all the dangerous machinery that might kill him, so he joins home ec instead, which leads to one of my personal favorite Kenny moments in this era of the show, the classroom scene.
I can't make love to you until we get a king-size bed.
Okay, real talk, if I was Kenny and I knew that I was gonna die, I would just say that I'm gay. Seems like the easiest way out of this. I don't know. But yeah, in a lot of ways, this episode is sort of like a better version of what they were going for with the first Mr. Hanky episode, where Kenny was constantly afraid of dying throughout the story. Only this time around, he's doing everything in his willpower to avoid dying instead of just hoping for the best, which really reinforces that self-aware aspect of his character. Kenny obviously knows that he dies very easily, and so we're now seeing him be proactive about it, which not only gives him more agency and decision-making power, but once again acts as an early foreshadowing of the Mysterion trilogy. Now those two Kenny stories from Rainforest, Schmainforest, and Tweak vs. Craig are a significant upgrade from how they were writing him back in seasons 1 and 2, but the truth is, they're just a small taste of how big season 3 was for Kenny, because the real game changer is the episode Jubilee, which not only gives us the rare Kyle and Kenny pairing, a totally underrated team that we don't get enough of by the way, but it also gives us one of the most important episodes for Kenny in the entire series. Because Jubilee is the first South Park episode where Kenny's perspective outweighs any other main character. This is predominantly his story to tell. Well, him and that one squirts counselor, but you get what I'm saying. In this episode, Kenny holds more narrative weight than Kyle. That was unheard of this early into the show. Kyle was right there next to Stan as one of the most important characters on South Park. And then suddenly comes this episode where Kenny seems to matter more than him. That's something that had never happened before Jubilee. So just on that alone, it was a monumental moment for Kenny's character. But the crazy thing is that that's not even the most important thing that happened to him in this episode, because what really matters is that this was the episode that changed his trajectory forever. And that's because this was the episode that made Kenny a hero.
Kenny, no!
Kenny, a hero to Jews everywhere. Now look, I'm gonna be real. Technically, the South Park movie predates this episode and that introduces the heroic Kenny thing first, but for the sake of structural goodness, we're gonna talk about this first, because we're already talking about season 3, and it'd be really awkward for me to jump to talking about the movie in the middle of that. And I'm telling you this because you like my transparency. It's charming and not at all just a way for me to justify my own laziness. But yeah, Jubilee is the first episode to truly put Kenny in a lead role position. Rainforest and Tweak vs. Craig, those were just side plots. And don't get me wrong, they were already big steps up for him anyways. But Jubilee, that's the first real Kenny episode. Let's get a round of applause, can we? That's our boy, that's our son. Now, you'd think that making a Kenny episode would come with some challenges because, well, he doesn't really speak comprehensively, but I gotta say, it never really feels like a problem. Like, obviously, the other characters can talk, so they're the ones who carry the weight in that sense, but even when it comes to Kenny's personality, they're able to convey so much through his actions and muffled voice. Like, we see how clever he is when he avoids getting gonged by the bell, and that little laugh he does when he thinks he got away with it. We feel his exclusion when he's kicked out of camp, and how let down he is by the whole experience. And of course, we see that he puts others above himself when he gives up his own life to save everyone else at Jubilee. Even though it makes no sense that his head broke the conch shell when the rock on the ground didn't work earlier, but that's not the point. The point is that by the end of this episode, Kenny is a self-sacrificial hero, just like Jesus. And that's a sentence that doesn't require any further scrutiny. I mean, just ask Kyle, he knew Kenny would save them.
I'm fine with obeying.
Yeah, obeying should work out swell.
Don't worry, you guys. He forgot about Kenny. Kenny will help us.
How?
Kenny will find a way.
Now, I highly doubt that Trey and Matt knew how significant this episode was going to be 2.5 decades later, but that idea of Kenny being a hero, that has gone on to be one of the most prominent and important aspects of his character. And it's also probably the main reason he's become such a fan favorite over the years. If you think about it, this was the first episode that saw Kenny use his power of reincarnation to save everyone, even though at the time we didn't know that was a thing yet. But still, it was the first time we saw him explicitly make a decision like that. And today, it's obviously the kind of thing we've come to expect from his character. But what's crazy is when that episode came out, which was just a month after the South Park movie was released, it became part of this moment in time that celebrated Kenny as a hero. For that month, Kenny was suddenly the most important character on the show, and it came out of nowhere. Because not only was he a hero in Jubilee, but Kenny is the hero of the South Park movie. Like, think about it. He spends most of it helping Satan overcome his relationship issues with Saddam, who's the real villain of the movie, which is like super noble and beautiful that he's helping the devil because he just doesn't discriminate. But at the very end of the movie, after all the bloodshed and war has ravaged the town, Kenny gets a wish from Satan for being so kind to him, and that gives him this opportunity to wish for his life back and return to Earth to be with his friends and family. But he doesn't do it because he recognizes that it's more important for him to use that wish to undo all the damage that's occurred over the course of the film. And so he gives up his opportunity to have a second chance at life in order to give everyone else a better life, showing that Kenny is an extremely selfless person who is loving and wise enough to put the world before himself, which of course ends up being one of the most heartwarming moments in the entire series to this day.
Thank you, Kenny.
Yeah, thanks for going back to hell for us. You're a real pal. Goodbye, you guys.
Yes, I'm crying. Yes, I'm a little bitch, but that's not what's important right now. Because what is important is that Kenny is the MVP of the movie. He's the savior, he's the force of good, he's the goddamn hero, and that's why everybody loves him. But the question is, why did that happen? Yeah, that's what the question is, which is just another way of saying that that's what I want to talk about now. I think to some degree, it was an extension of the fact that he's the helpful one. Kenny was already putting himself in these positions where he had to save the day in some way by being expendable. I mean, there's Team B, can't ever forget Team B, rip grandma. So maybe it was just a natural progression of having him die in every episode, because that is what led to writing him as the helpful character. And I could see how that would slowly turn into making him the altruistic character, which eventually just becomes the heroic character. But in my headcanon, it's because of two things: his crappy upbringing and his reincarnation powers. Because I mean, we know that his home life sucks and that he's easily the least fortunate kid on the show, but I like to think that because he knows what suffering is, he chooses to be nice kindness to others to protect them from suffering. And for whatever reason, that seems to come hand in hand with this optimistic attitude that things could be better. Now, I don't know where that attitude comes from. Maybe it's from having friends like Stan and Kyle who have usually treated him well, or maybe it's just part of the magic of being a kid. But either way, I think it all helped shape him into the kind of person that takes matters into his own hands, especially when you combine that with his reincarnation powers. Because not only has Kenny seen how bad life can be over and over again, which has made him into a more positive person than the other members of his family, but he's been given a gift that lets him change things for the better. He can use death to help people, which is exactly what we see him do in the movie and in Jubilee. Those two stories were the first time that Kenny's writing had evolved to the point where his personality and the factors that make him Kenny had added up to him being the hero we know him as today. And even though it would be years before we got Mysterion and before audiences actually thought of Kenny as a hero, that summer in 1999 ended up becoming one of the most important time periods in his character's history. But like I said, nobody actually knew that yet. At the time, these seemed more like one-off occurrences than trajectory-altering moments. And as far as audiences were concerned, Kenny was still the same old Kenny he always was. But from a writing perspective, there was a newfound confidence behind using him as a character. And because of that, season 4 ended up using Kenny more than any other season had before. And look, I know, I've been kind of saying that a lot in this video so far, because let's be real, Kenny's character went through a lot of growth in those early years, and so every season was using him more than ever before. But seriously, season 4 hits different, because it has more Kenny-focused episodes than almost any other season in the entire show. And by almost, I mean that there's literally only one season that beats it out, which is the Mysterion season. So you can see why I'm hyping it up so much. Because baby, let me tell you, it's not just a regular good season for Kenny, it's moving the sausage and cheese cart good. That's how high tier it is.
What? How'd you get in here?
Now, what really makes season 4 so special is that we get to see Kenny from a bunch of different angles. We see new sides of him, old sides of him, we even get the introduction of Kenny lore, which is a weird thing to say about a South Park character, but hey, that's just part of what makes Kenny so unique. And most importantly, we finally get the one thing that every Kenny fan had been asking for since the beginning of the show: his opera arc.
Lesson 1. Good. And now we'll do the entire piece Conte Partiro.
What, you didn't pick up on all the subtle hints that Kenny was an artistic genius? The elaborate deaths, the lighting his fart on fire, the sneezing on Cartman? Psh, you call yourself a South Park fan. Okay, so maybe this opera episode isn't the deepest Kenny episode out there, but you gotta give credit where it's due. This is a very unique entry for him. I mean, who would have expected an episode where Kenny starts learning opera and actually succeeds at it? Not me, but you best believe that those opera skills are canon now. What I like about this episode is that you can tell they're starting to have a lot more fun with Kenny's character. Like the places opera takes him and the way they incorporated his family. The fact that he does opera at all, it feels very fresh and covers a lot of new territory for Kenny. It even alters the dynamic between him and the other boys in a way that we never really saw in seasons 1 to 3 of the movie. Because once his singing career takes off, Kenny seems more than happy to leave his old friends behind. And you know, I'm not gonna lie, I get it. He's been living in poverty his whole life and this is his big chance to make something of himself. So he should take the opportunity, but it does feel like a bit of a contrast to the helpful and heroic Kenny we've grown accustomed to over those first 3 seasons. Like, this is probably the most selfish version of Kenny that we ever get to see in the show. And you could tell that it came about because they were still trying to figure out which direction to go in with this character, and this was the product of them getting more experimental with him. In fact, season 4 is a pretty experimental year for Kenny in general, because when you look at a lot of these episodes in the context of his history, it kind of just feels like they threw a bunch of stuff at the wall to see what would stick. Like the singing thing and the negative attitude towards his friends, that's mostly exclusive to this episode. But the way he's extremely ambitious and has a very strong work ethic, that ends up becoming a recurring trait of his. And you could say the same thing about the episode Fat Camp, where we get to see Kenny's degenerate side make its glorious return. Because on one hand, it plays on those classic Kenny tropes that we were getting in the first 3 seasons, like his desperation for money and his willingness to get a little gross. But on the other hand, they took it way further than they ever did before, because in this episode, he has like no self-respect at all, and they just fully commit to making him into a prostitute.
Now, some people think that all you guys do is perform sick and disgusting acts for shock value and money, which makes you whores. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer each of you $50,000 to give me oral sex right now.
I'm in. Me too.
Now look, I get that he's poor and needs the money, I do, but I feel like you gotta really not value yourself to do some of this shit. Like, there's a point in this episode where Kenny lets people crap on him. Literally. He also eats raw manatee spleen for like $20, despite the negative effects that would probably have on his body. That's why I feel like this is a more extreme version of the degenerate Kenny that we saw in the seasons before this. And that goes for every episode after this too. I gotta say, this is a unique low point for Kenny that we just don't really see at any other point in the show. Oh, what's that you say? The cat piss episode in season 12 is also pretty bad? Well, if you're so smart, explain this, Clarissa. Nah, but seriously, fair point, but I think it's a bit of a different situation, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Anyways, while the opera and prostitution episodes give us some fun Kenny action, and it's pretty neato that they give us 2 full Kenny storylines in the same season, there's still another episode that's even more Kenny-centric, and it just so happens to be one of the most important Kenny episodes in the whole series. Yeah, that's right, this season has 3 Kenny episodes, with more involved storytelling than the season 3 ones. So see, I wasn't kidding when I said that this was a big year for him. Now, personally, of all the stories in the early years of Kenny, this one is by far my favorite, because it's easily one of his funniest in the show, and it establishes a piece of lore that would forever change him as a character. Because after this episode aired, it was official. Kenny has the power of reincarnation.
Maybe we should name him, Kenny.
Yes, Kenny's such a great name. My little Kenny, a brand new Kenny.
God, this must be the 50th time this has happened.
52nd.
Now, I'm sure that when this episode originally aired, this was only meant to be another funny meta joke about Kenny dying all the time, especially since they were still doing that type of humor a lot back then. Like, even the very next episode has a joke where Kenny gets mad at Stan for worrying that Kyle might die, you know, because from his perspective, it's not a big deal, it happens all the time. But because South Park is weirdly good about being consistent, this episode ended up changing Kenny forever. It was our first bit of lore into how Kenny keeps coming back to life after each death. He's reborn from his mother every time. Now, obviously, this gets elaborated on in much more detail in Season 14's Coon and Friends trilogy, which really takes the concept to a new level. But this episode, Cartman Joins Nambla, laid the groundwork for that storyline all the way back in the year 2000. Plus, it also has something else in common with the Coon and Friends trilogy, which is that in this episode, Kenny is policing his parents, a now recurring trait of the show that originally started here. In this episode, it happens after Kenny's mom tells him that they're planning to have another baby, because when he quickly realizes how it's going to negatively affect him and the rest of the family, because they're already poor and sharing those resources with another kid will only make things worse, he tries to do everything in his power to terminate his mom's pregnancy, which, you know, admittedly is a bit selfish. He's definitely thinking about how it's going to affect him more than anyone else in the house, but he's also the only one in his family that realizes how bad of an idea it would be to go through with having another kid, which fits the general trend we see throughout the show of Kenny being smarter and better than his parents. So to me, this reads as Kenny trying to force his parents to be better guardians, which is not so different from Mysterion telling them to be nicer to their kids and to stop using drugs. Only, you know, instead of intimidating them, he tries to poison them or use a plunger.
Oh, hi, Kenny. What are you doing? What are you going to plunge?
Kenny, what the hell are you doing?
Now, before you say that wouldn't work, have you ever tried to abort a fetus with a plunger? That's right. Didn't think so. Now, you'd think that with all these great Kenny episodes in season 4 and everything they established for his character, that they would just keep pushing on in that direction, keep escalating his presence in the show, experimenting with his stories, refining his personality. But nope. In reality, the exact opposite happens, because come season 5, Kenny takes a major step backwards as a character. His prominence almost completely fades, and he reverts back to being a side character that has basically no agency in almost any of the plots. Even his oldest traits, like his knowledge about sex, seems to take a big step backwards for some reason. Like how in the episode Proper Condom Use, he doesn't know what milking the dog actually is, which is just odd considering his starting point back in season 1. This is also around the time that he begins to die a lot less. Now, it doesn't stop altogether. We definitely get a death or two across the season, like the giant bird randomly taking him away in Cripple Fight, or when he laughs himself to death at Cartman's Little Piggy video in the Scott Tenorman episode. Plus, we do get a joke that implies his parka is cursed or something, since it almost kills Jimmy several times after Timmy gives it to him.
There he is! Kill him! Kill him! Oh, wait, that's not him. Thanks again, Tib.
But otherwise, Kenny ends up retreating away from the spotlight in season 5, marking it as the first season to move his character in the opposite direction, a trend that will sadly come to dominate certain eras of the show after this. Now, it's not like he's completely out of the picture in season 5. We at least get one episode where he and Cartman team up to pull a prank on picture day. You know, when Kenny puts on the clothes backwards and has his butt where his face should be. Great gag, and I love that it's another example of him and Cartman sharing a special friendship moment, but unfortunately, this is more of an outlier for the season than the norm, and we just really don't get a lot of moments like this. So suffice to say, as a Kenny fan, I find this development to be pretty lame. So season 5 is just lucky that it's loaded out the ass with amazing episodes, or you know, I'd like it less. However, it has one episode that does put Kenny back in the spotlight and give him some much needed attention, but it's a bittersweet one, because it just so happens to be the episode where Kenny dies.
So Kenny, if you could have one wish, what would it be?
He said his wish is not to die.
Man, it's been like 25 years since that episode aired, and I still think it's hilarious that they made a whole ass episode out of Kenny dying. Just such a great way to kill off a character whose running gag is dying all the time, especially with the reincarnation thing in mind. I bet that Kenny just loved that people were actually taking his death seriously for once. Now, obviously, this episode is mostly a joke and a way for them to take Kenny out of the show, even though it's also emotional as hell and makes me cry like a bitch. But you already know that, because you're cool, which means you've seen my South Park Saddest Moments video, and that makes this a reference and not just a convenient way for me to plug it. But hey, this episode doesn't just make me cry, it also makes Cartman cry. And given that Cartman was a full-on psychopath by this point in the show, that actually holds a lot of weight. And that's exactly what makes this episode so special for Kenny. This is the show finally celebrating him the way he deserves to be celebrated. Season 3 in the movie may have given him more of a spotlight, but this episode gives him some recognition. He gets a real send-off, his friends care about him deeply, he's shown a lot of love, and it makes the whole thing feel like a testament to how far his character has come since the first episode. So even though he may have taken a step backwards for most of season 5, his farewell served as a stark reminder of how important he's been to the show. And it officially confirmed that Cartman-Kenny friendship that we'd seen brewing in the background of the show over these last 5 seasons.
Well, I don't know if I ever told you this, Kenny, but I kind of always thought you were my best friend. I don't know.
It's hard to say for sure, but it sounds like Kenny says, "Eric, you're my best friend too," showing that, at least at this point in the show, Kenny feels the same way. Now later we'll see that Kenny seems to change his mind about Eric, but for now, we at least know that Cartman cares about Kenny in a way that he doesn't care about Stan or Kyle. He has a deeper bond with him, and this is an idea that the show continues to uphold in future seasons. So it's no longer just something that we have to infer, it's a matter of fact about the show. And it's the last big hurrah for the early years of Kenny, his final contribution to the era, because once he dies, the show starts a new chapter.
No, this can't happen. Kenny can't die. Kenny can't die.
God damn, that is a sad clip. All right, we need to lighten the mood a little bit. Let's cut to Zach. That always cheers me up. Just had a very serious, emotional moment, and I need you to lighten the mood for the audience. Go.
There he is.
Hell yeah. Well, I feel better now. Now, you'd think that season 6, the season where Kenny is dead, would be his least prominent season in the entire show, but you'd be wrong. That's actually the season after he comes back. Yeah. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's true. And that's because after Trey and Matt killed off Kenny, they realized something. They f***ed up. Or at least that's what it says here on South Park Studios. See? Right there. They realized something, ... they f***ed up. So that's like official South Park history and totally not something I just photoshopped in 2 minutes. But you know, if that website were to say something different, it would probably be something like, Matt and Trey missed having Kenny in the show and decided to bring him back. Now, if you've seen season 6, you know exactly how that went. The first half has no Kenny at all, and the second half gradually reintroduces him to the show by giving us what we all now know as the Kenny Possession arc, or the Kenny Ashes arc. Okay, fine, there is no official name, but you know what I'm talking about. It's the serialized element of season 6 that focuses on Kenny, even though he's dead. And because it spans across multiple episodes, it almost feels like Kenny has a presence in the show across the back half of season 6, which makes it one of the most unique seasons of the show prior to the introduction of serialized elements in season 18. It all starts with A Ladder to Heaven, where the boys want to talk to Kenny to ask where he put their winning lottery tickets to a candy spree, even though, again, he's dead. But you know, they're 8, they're dumb, they think it's possible, and so they visit Kenny's parents for the first time since his passing to ask if they can talk to him, causing his mom, Carol, to break down in front of his urn.
Your friends are here to see you, Kenny. They miss you an awful lot, like we all do.
Thanks for coming by, boys. It means a lot to us. Oh, now, honey.
Now, much like with the actual death episode, I really enjoy that we get to see characters actually care about Kenny and grieve for him, and it's especially nice to see his parents in this humanizing light since we're so used to seeing them depicted in negative ways where they're just the butt of some joke. But yeah, this all leads to Cartman drinking Kenny's ashes because he thinks it's chocolate milk mix, causing Kenny's soul to be trapped in Cartman's body. A fitting turn of events given that Cartman saw Kenny as his best friend, so of course he would be the one to get possessed by his soul, and that turns into a fun little gimmick that allows us to see Kenny's memories and even have him interact with the South Park world despite the fact that he's dead. We see a classic bus stop scene with the boys, but from Kenny's perspective. We see these little glimpses of what his home life was like, and we see unique sides of his personality that weren't focused on as much in the previous seasons, like how he wanted to watch Rob Schneider movies on the airplane even though they looked dumb as hell, which low-key confirms the fact that his taste is pretty lame. Bro probably loves Adam Sandler movies, and not just the good ones, but like Jack and Jill type shit. We also get a scene where Kenny uses Cartman's body to throw a paper airplane at Mr. Garrison during class, which is a very trolly, Bart Simpson-esque thing to do, and is pretty different from how he usually acts in class. I like to think that it's because he knows that he can get away with it and that Cartman will take the blame, which Kenny would probably find funny. But still, it's not the usual quiet Kenny that we're used to, and I find it interesting that he's louder in death than he was in life, because not only do his actions demand more attention, but he literally speaks too. Like straight up, I think that season 6 gives us the most amount of clear Kenny dialogue that the show ever had up until that point. He calls Cartman a blood-belching vagina, rips on him for getting the boys lost, demands to watch the stupid Rob Schneider movies. Like, this is straight up more dialogue than we got in the South Park movie. And it's cool because it feels like we're finally getting to hear what Kenny's been saying under the muffled voice for once. And I know we had that moment at the end of the South Park movie where he takes off his hood, which was very special and tender and very sweet and pure. But here it's like we're unmasking the Kenny we see in regular episodes. We're getting to hear what he's like on an average day. So for that reason alone, it's a very cool arc, even if it doesn't actually lead to anything because they just bring Kenny back on a whim like nothing ever happened.
Well, all in all, I have to say this was a pretty special Christmas.
Hey guys, what's going on?
Oh, hey, Kenny.
Dude, where have you been?
Fun fact, back in the old days of Kazaa and LimeWire, this episode always used to be titled as Kenny's Back, which really confused me as a kid because I'd only seen random episodes of the show, so I didn't get what was so special about the ending. God, I miss those days. Also, shout out to MrTwig.net. The real ones know what I'm talking about. But yeah, after all of that, after going through a whole mini arc to reintroduce Kenny to the show, you want to know what it led to? Absolutely nothing. Like, at all. Like, seriously, I don't know why they bothered to bring him back, because he may as well have been dead for all of seasons 7 and 8. Because in that time, we don't get any side plots to focus on him. He straight up reverts back to having little to no agency in the episodes at all, which once again puts him in that sidekick position where he's kind of just there while things happen. Plus, he doesn't even die anymore, aside from maybe like 1 or 2 deaths across both seasons. Straight up, I think his only notable moments in seasons 7 and 8 are like doing space drugs in the episode Cancelled, offering to snap a pic of Sharon's boobs in the Trent Boyette episode, watching The Passion with Stan and silently joining him to get their money back from Mel Gibson, keeping Cartman away from Stan and Kyle when they go to destroy the Walmart, which mostly happens off screen, agreeing that they should fess up about TPing the art teacher's house, pretending to be Blanket in the Michael Jackson episode, which I'll admit is a little bit more than all these other examples because we at least do get to hear his voice, which is kind of cool. And of course, my personal favorite, playing the role of good cop in the episode Little Crime Stoppers, where they're trying to get a confession out of Butters.
You're going down, Butters, you hear me?
Oh, I don't know.
You're a worthless $2 criminal and you're lying.
It's okay, sir.
Now that one's just adorable with his high-pitched soothing voice. Plus I like that it lines up with Kenny being the kind one of the group, so at least we got that. Also, I just realized that I forgot the ninja episode where Kenny obliterates Butters. Can't forget that gem. Now I realize that listing it all out like that makes it sound like he was pretty active, but you gotta remember that these are mostly just tiny moments in episodes that otherwise give him nothing to do. Even that blanket appearance from the Michael Jackson episode makes fun of this very fact. So trust me when I say that he's been heavily demoted in those seasons. It's really not until season 9 that we finally get an episode that focuses on Kenny again, which is pretty crazy considering that it took them like 3 years to actually do something with this character after killing him off. But the good news is that in exchange for that wait, we get a pretty great episode. Arguably one of Kenny's best episodes, and it won an Emmy, which is why in season 11 they were able to do this.
Oh, here it comes.
Never forget that we only got that moment because of Kenny. Anyways, season 9's Best Friends Forever is about Kenny being selected by heaven to command their army in a war against hell, which he was picked for because he had the highest score on some PSP game before he got run over by a car. Now, how did Kenny afford a PSP back when it just came out? I don't know. Stop asking questions, stupid. But because he was the best non-Japanese player of the game, they recruited him to be their Neo and win them the war. Now, hilariously, that side of the story is actually not really all that important to Kenny as a character. I mean, it's fun and cool that he does this, but that's about it. However, what is relevant to Kenny is what happens on Earth after he gets hit by the car. Because when a doctor manages to bring him back to life in a paralyzed vegetative state, a conflict breaks out over whether or not he should be kept alive. And in that conflict, Cartman wants Kenny to be taken off life support because in his will, yes, Kenny had a will, it makes sense when you think about it. But yeah, in his will, Kenny left Cartman his PSP. And the only way he can get it is if Kenny is fully dead instead of just brain dead. Now again, that conflict doesn't necessarily mean much to Kenny as a character, but everything that surrounds it does. And that's because of what Kenny wrote in his will.
In the highly likely event of my death, I, Kenny McCormick, wish to leave all my belongings to my good friends Stan and Kyle. Dudes, you were the best friends a guy could have.
Oh, wow. That's really touching.
See, I told you it made sense when you think about it. I really enjoy that they wrote this into the episode because even though we as the audience already assume that Kenny cares a lot about his friends, it's nice that we get to put that into words for once as opposed to just basing it on his actions. And this kind of confirms for us that despite Cartman's special relationship with Kenny, it's actually Stan and Kyle that are Kenny's best friends. And in that same vein, it confirms for us that Kenny actually doesn't like Cartman very much at all. So it truly is a one-way street kind of friendship that they have. And that's not just something that we're inferring here, because that too is written into his will.
Eric, I never really liked you, but then nobody does. You have no ability to feel, and you are going to die alone and miserable. It is only because I feel so sorry for you that I leave you my Sony PSP.
Savage! Jesus Christ, Kenny just destroyed Cartman. Slap it on a thumbnail and print it. But yeah, there you have it. Kenny does not like Cartman, even though they totally continue to have stories together and Cartman fully still sees him as his best friend in future episodes. Also, I'm just now realizing that the show seems to have a pattern of making Kenny more vocal in death than he is in life. A pretty interesting coincidence, I gotta say. I guess that's what happens when you make your character an incomprehensible kid that dies all the time. Anyways, one thing I've always found very funny about this episode is that when things devolve into a big divisive issue where people are debating whether or not they should pull the plug on Kenny, Cartman tries to sway the decision towards his side by leveraging the fact that him and Kenny were BFFs, even toting his matching BFF necklace. And I just find that so ridiculous that he'd be able to get away with it considering that Kenny directly states in his will that he's never liked Eric. Massive blunder from the lawyer in my opinion. Also, I think the fact that Kenny had a matching BFF necklace with Cartman at all is a testament to what a supportive person he is. I mean, he doesn't even like the dude, but he's willing to humor him that much anyway. What a nice guy. Although maybe Cartman just planted the necklace on Kenny when nobody was looking, which I 100% am also willing to believe. Anyways, there's still one last passage we need to hear from Kenny's will that tells us something about his personality, and that's the passage they read at the very end of the episode.
If I should ever be in a vegetative state and kept alive on life support, please, for the love of God, don't ever show me in that condition on national television.
Now, obviously, this was mainly put in here to act as commentary on the real situation that this episode was satirizing, which was a similar debate happening in 2005 around Terry Schiavo, a woman who was in a vegetative state after suffering a heart attack and being resuscitated by a doctor. So Trey and Matt were clearly using Kenny as their own voices on the situation, and now they felt that publicizing the controversy failed to respect Terry Schiavo's dignity. But regardless, that statement is now a canon part of Kenny's character, and I gotta say, based as hell. You gotta love that Kenny not only has the foresight to expect something like that to happen, but that he also has his priorities fully in order. He cares about maintaining his dignity, which, in my opinion, fits very well with how he typically defends himself when people rip on him for being poor. Yeah, that's right, baby. We're back to getting a Kenny with pride and confidence, and I like that. But yeah, sadly, this is about all we get from Kenny during this era of the show. Everything else is just small stuff, a line or two here and there, and that's it. Like season 10, you could probably just take him out of the show for that entire season and it would change basically nothing. And it does marginally get better in season 11. Like we do have the ending of the lice episode where all the kids give Kenny a sock bath because they're trying to deflect attention away from themselves, because it turns out they all have lice. But that's really more in the category of things that happen to Kenny than actual moments of development for his character. So it's a far cry from the stories we were getting in seasons 3 and 4 or the movie, where Kenny actually made decisions and had some semblance of a character journey. But hey, it's something, and at least season 11 gives us one of the best Kenny deaths in the entire show. But yeah, otherwise this is a very quiet era in Kenny's history. He gets his big moments in season 6, but then he only gets one episode for the next 5 seasons. So it's kind of like the opposite of the early years. We barely get any development for his character, and it's pretty much a ghost town as far as Kenny action goes. So yeah, even though these are some of my favorite seasons in the show, it's not a great time for Kenny fans. It's almost like instead of keeping him dead, they just made him useless and stopped writing stories around him. Wait a second. Oh my god. They killed Kenny's airtime! Those bastards! Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Anyways, there's really not much else for me to say here. And I think we can all agree that for Kenny, this era was pretty meh with a capital P. So let's conveniently end this section and get into the good stuff, shall we?
Alright, dude, get in his bed.
Alright, but you guys owe me for this.
Dude, whatever, at least you finally get to do something.
Oh yeah, baby, it's time for Kenny Mania, the proverbial good stuff that I just mentioned 2 seconds ago. Now, as I'm sure you can guess from the name of this era, this is the absolute peak of Kenny. This era is where Kenny becomes more prominent than ever before, gets his most important roles in the show, speaks without being muffled for multiple episodes, and it all starts with this dance.
I gotta get home for dinner. Yeah, me too.
Oh, you think I'm joking? You think this dance is not important? Well, if you believe that, then you know nothing about Kenny. I mean, just look at this. His open-minded attitude towards music that annoys the other boys, the optimism in those little hand movements, the all-knowing, all-understanding wobble and head tilt. This is the definition of Kenny. In fact, this little dance is so representative of everything that makes him great that I could have just looped that clip over and over again for like 90 minutes straight, and this would have been the greatest Kenny video that YouTube has ever seen. Matter of fact, let's do that right now. Okay, fine, I'll do the rest of the video normally, but you know it won't be as good as the dancing. Anyways, after several seasons of having almost no Kenny episodes or Kenny prominent moments, his resurgence finally kicks off with season 12's Major Boobage, the first episode to give him a proper storyline since season 9. And what you'll notice about it, and the start of this era in general, is that Kenny's personality kind of reverts back to how he was in the early seasons of the show, or at least that's the side of him that they choose to focus on. Because these episodes drop a lot of the nuance we've seen from him over the years and instead showcase his degenerate and sex-obsessed side. And if you know the episode Major Boobage, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This episode is about Kenny huffing cat piss so that he can be transported to a magical reality where everything is boobs. And obviously, because this is YouTube, I can't show most of that, cause boobs. So instead, please enjoy this clip of Kenny being a total drug addict.
Dude, Kenny, calm down.
Now look, I'm gonna be honest, this is a great episode, it's got cool animation, a funny Cartman plot, but it's not the deepest outing for Kenny as a character. Much like with Best Friends Forever, the bulk of the plot revolves around Kenny being thrust into a situation that largely plays out on its own, so even though it showcases elements of his personality and actually gives him some opportunities to make decisions, it still kinda ends up feeling like Kenny is along for the ride here. Because he's mostly just doing what he's told to do by characters he's hallucinating, which makes up the majority of the episode. But still, it does two notable things in my opinion. One, it reinforces just how sex crazed he is by pitting him against Gerald in a fight for the Maiden of Bube world. And two, it establishes a new component to Kenny's personality that continues to exist in later episodes, which is that Kenny has an addictive personality. Something that I think feels like a very organic extension of his more depraved qualities. Because when it comes to huffing cat piss, Kenny isn't just messed up because he's willing to try it. He's messed up because he literally can't stop. And when he's awoken from his trip, he's violently angry about it. Honestly, it's kind of scary to see how badly the cat piss messes him up in the real world. And that's the major theme of this episode, drug addiction, which is something that Stan and Kyle take great concern over when they see how it's affecting their friend, despite the fact that he's never willing to take their concern seriously. Now, they never really elaborate on it much from Kenny's perspective. They don't say why he has an addictive personality or show any signs of him acknowledging that it's a bad thing. So in that way, I feel like it's a bit lacking in terms of his character journey, but they do go out of their way to establish that it's a feature of Kenny. And they make a point of showing how it's not just about the cat piss, it's about any high that Kenny can get his hands on as long as it has a similar effect on him, even if it's coming from flowers.
Isn't that great? He's just getting high on life. Yeah. He's getting really high on life.
Now, I feel like it's worth mentioning that Kenny's parents are shown to be drug addicts, so there's definitely an implication here that Kenny inherited that behavior from them in some way, but that's not something that the show has actually gotten into, it's just an inference on my part. But, like I mentioned earlier, we do see this addict side of Kenny in episodes after Major Boobage. Like, for example, the season 14 episode Sexual Healing, where Kenny dies from autoerotic asphyxiation in the closet while wearing a Batman suit. But Major Boobage was just the beginning of what would become Kenny Mania, like a transitional moment, if you will. Because where things really start to heat up are in season 13, which was the first season to start off with a Kenny episode since season 3's Rainforest Schmainforest. Now, most people just know this as the Jonas Brothers episode, which was also the first time that Mickey Mouse was ever a character. But really, this is a special one for Kenny because it marks the second time on the show that he's had a girlfriend. And she's a 5th grader too, so you know it's serious. Actually, wait, hold on a second. If Kenny's first girlfriend was in the opener to season 3, and his second girlfriend was in the opener to season 13, does that mean he gets a girlfriend every 10 seasons? Hold on a sec. Never mind, false alarm. Anyways, the whole joke of this episode is that Kenny's girlfriend is supposed to be a slut, which obviously makes Kenny very happy. But they don't actually get to do anything with each other because the Jonas Brothers convince them to wear purity rings, which leads to Kenny living this boring life where he and his girlfriend act like an old married couple that loves Grey's Anatomy and go to bed at 8 p.m. or something. Now, like with Major Boobage, this is another Kenny story that focuses on his classic tropes because it's once again about Kenny being a horny little freak.
Cocky little freak!
And so the humor mainly comes from how he's being denied action with his girlfriend thanks to the purity ring stuff. So yeah, once again, it's not exactly the most groundbreaking Kenny story, but given that we're getting proper Kenny episodes again after 5 seasons of barely anything, I'd say it definitely satisfies the itch. And also, I think it's worth mentioning that the degenerate drug angle comes up in this episode too, when the boys try to wake Kenny up out of his zombie-like daze by offering him paint to sniff.
Kenny? Wanna look at Playboys? Wanna get high sniffing paint? Kenny?
Now, to be fair, this episode does take a more nuanced approach to Kenny's personality, because he's not just a horny degenerate, he also shows off his compassionate side. Like, first of all, the beginning of this episode confirms that Kenny started dating his girlfriend before he knew that she was the school slut, which at least suggests that his interest in her goes beyond that simple desire to get action. This also lines up with the fact that Kenny chooses to stay with her even after she suggests that they start wearing purity rings, so this is clearly not a one-sided portrayal of Kenny like Major Boobage might have been, even though they're playing it pretty safe in terms of what they're doing with his character. But on the other hand, the only reason that Kenny takes her to the Jonas Brothers concert in the first place is because she explains to him that they have a weird power over her, and that watching them perform causes her to feel overcome with a feeling that makes her lose control of herself around boys. So even though she told him that she was very self-conscious about her past, Kenny brings her to the Jonas Brothers concert anyways in hopes of riling her up, which is pretty manipulative. And bad. Also, where did he get the money for Jonas Brothers tickets? I mean, oh, wait, I'm asking stupid questions again. My bad. But yeah, we're just gonna call that character complexity because he's not so black and white, man. He's a complicated person. He does bad things too. Which just goes to show that Kenny has his strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes he's the nice and helpful one, and sometimes he has syphilis.
And so, as we commit this young child to the earth, let us all be reminded that syphilis is still a deadly disease, and it can be caught even if using protection.
Well, you get the idea. Even Kenny is far from perfect. He's got flaws. But on an unrelated note, Kenny's gonna be the most perfect character for the rest of the show. No, but seriously, Kenny is like almost exclusively the best person in town pretty much immediately after that episode. It's like a full-on course correction from here, and it all starts with him becoming a superhero in season 13's The Coon.
I'm an angel keeping watch over the city at night. As violence and darkness take over the streets, I work to rid the city of crime. I'm the symbol this town needs.
Now, the funny thing about Mysterion is we didn't actually know that he was Kenny until season 14. So technically, this wasn't originally a Kenny episode when it aired. However, since Mysterion actually is Kenny, and the way he acts in this episode is consistent with all of his other appearances, I think it's fair to say that with that context, this is now officially a Kenny episode. Let me just add that official Slush brand sticker to it. There we go. Now, I gotta say, this was a pretty big development for Kenny. Mysterion is vocal. He's pure main character material. I mean, that's the whole joke of the episode, right? That everyone pays attention to him instead of Cartman, which, by the way, reverses their usual dynamic, because usually Cartman is the one dictating the terms of their special friendship, but this time, it's Kenny. And if you think about it, that's really the opposite of where Kenny started out in this show. In season 1, he was basically just a throwaway gag character, but now, as Mysterion, he's so interesting that his existence demands the spotlight. You can't put him in the background because you can't help but focus on him. So it really is like the opposite of the original Kenny idea. And I just love that this persona combines Kenny's best qualities. Mysterion is brave, mature, and noble. He's genuinely trying to make the world a better place, which is why he helps the police fight crime and clean up the city. I mean, he doesn't do anything crazy. He tells the cops about some graffiti and a guy at the movie theater that's harassing Mexicans, but that's more than I did when I was in 4th grade. I mean, hell, all I really did was show South Park to the other kids at school and teach them how to swear. So I think that Kenny's actions here are still noteworthy and that they demonstrate his desire to improve the town. Plus, I like that his tactics feel pretty realistic for a kid. It's charming. But of course, most importantly, the introduction of Mysterion marks the point in the show where Kenny's character shifts back to being a hero, which comes after years of getting stories that had reverted him back to the old tropes of being a horny degenerate or depraved. So with Mysterion, not only are they calling back to episodes like Jubilee or the movie, but they're finally embracing that heroic side of Kenny. They're making it a main defining feature of his character, which would forever change how audiences perceive him. And that all starts with season 14's Coon and Friends trilogy.
But even the other heroes do not know that unlike them, I do have a power they will now begin to understand, and all will know who and what I truly am.
Now this is what I'm talking about. This trilogy right here is single-handedly responsible for propelling Kenny into unprecedented levels of popularity. Which is not to say that he wasn't popular before. Fans were famously quite upset about him being killed off back in season 6. But Mysterion changed the game for Kenny. It made him one of the coolest, most badass and likable characters on the entire show. And the way they portray him here is distinctly different from episodes like Jubilee or the South Park movie. Because in those situations, even though he was very much a hero, his heroism was the result of his pure heart. He did what he thought he had to do. It was a very reactive thing. But with Mysterion, Kenny went out of his way to be a hero. It was proactive. And that leaves a much bigger impression on the viewers and how we perceive him. It's the moment that most of us finally started recognizing him for the hero that he is, even though that side of him had existed since 1999. And you can even see this effect in my own videos. Like last year, I did a video on the Coon and Friends trilogy, and in it, I described Kenny as being the party friend before he became Mysterion. And like, after going through all the episodes again and making this video, it's pretty obvious that there was actually so much more nuance to Kenny than I remembered, but at the time, what stuck for me were his classic traits, his party friend traits. That's how I remembered the pre-Mysterion Kenny as someone who had been watching this show for years. So it was only when he donned the costume that that perception changed for me, which I think is representative of how profound this trilogy was for Kenny. Even now, at the time of me making this video, there are rumors that Kenny is being added to Fortnite in a way that uses his resurrection abilities. And let me tell you something, his hero title is well earned, because they put him through so much in this trilogy. They stab him, he gets impaled on spikes, he shoots himself in the face. There's that really awesome scene where he puts Captain Hindsight's gun to his head and dares him to pull the trigger. And it doesn't come off as a gag like with his other deaths, because this trilogy redefines how we understand Kenny at his core. Specifically, because we learn that he remembers every single painful death that happens to him.
Dude, Kenny, what'd you run away for? We gotta fight these guys. Yeah, come on, get your costume on, lazy ass.
Man, this change just instantly made Kenny so much cooler, because it puts him in a position where he's more aware of his surroundings than any other kid in South Park. Hell, any other adult too. And it makes his dying feel that much more serious and real. In the past, we only ever interpreted it as a form of slapstick. You know, they were just like funny gags that would be in every episode, and that's all there really was to it. But with the Coon and Friends trilogy, knowing that he remembers dying completely recontextualizes how we understand those gags. Suddenly, we see the absolute agony that it puts Kenny through to have those experiences. And even worse, to have nobody remember them, which just makes every death feel extra brutal. But I think that's the real crux of what makes Kenny such a hero here. Dying sucks balls, but he goes through with it anyway because that's what it takes to save his friends and the people in town. And you get the sense that he understands that it's up to him to save the day because he spent so much of this show being the victim. He's the one that dies over and over again without ever getting any help. He knows that if he doesn't take action, nobody else will. And so he subjects himself to these torturous deaths because that's what makes him a real hero. He does what nobody else will. I mean, he's no Mint Berry Crunch, but he is a real hero, especially when it comes to his own family. Because this is the episode that cements the idea that Kenny is the one who really looks out for his siblings. He knows his parents are incompetent drug addicts. He knows they're not gonna magically start acting better, so he does what he can to force them into being better guardians, which usually means scaring the crap out of them as Mysterion.
Hey, look, we did what you told us. We treat our kids better and we don't beat each other up as much.
And we gave our sons allowances and stopped getting high every night.
I love the implication that he's been doing this since season 13. Also, the idea that Kenny uses Mysterion to help his family is actually another recurring theme that started with this trilogy. For example, we see it again in season 15's The Poor Kid when he uses it to help his sister Karen. In this episode, Kenny and Karen end up living in a foster home because the rest of the family gets drunk and starts fighting with each other. Yeah, Kenny's family really sucks in a lot of these post-Mysterion episodes. Except for Karen. She's pure. She's like Kenny because she also starts with a K. But yeah, this foster home that they go to just really sucks. The parents are these crazy authoritarian agnostic people that force agnosticism on everyone, which is exactly as stupid and funny as it sounds. And they're like very dogmatic about it. They take it very seriously, which even leads to them abusing the kids for not also being agnostic enough. And on top of that, the new school that they go to is just way harsher than their old one for whatever reason. So this whole experience ends up being really difficult for Karen because she's young and she's struggling to adjust and it's hard. But then Kenny comes in with Mysterion, and it may be cheesy, it may be crunchy, could even be doughy, but it's definitely a pizza. What are we talking about? Oh yeah, I love Kenny in this episode.
Mind your business, Peter Pan.
Karen McCormick is off limits. Do you understand?
Kenny's relationship with Karen is one of the cutest things in the entire show, and this episode is where we first get to see it. The way he acts as her guardian angel and guides her is just so damn heartwarming. It adds this extra dimension to Kenny's nice and helpful side that puts him in like Butter's tier of pureness. Like their dynamic absolutely makes Kenny one of the best people in the show, full stop, which he already was, but like this is the icing on the cake. And that's not even the only awesome thing that Kenny does in this episode, because by the end of the story, Kenny saves all of the kids at the foster home by donning his Mysterion costume, which he breaks out when the agnostic parents go crazy and start hosing kids down with Dr. Pepper. God, I love this show. Kenny manages to free them all by using Mysterion to trick the parents into getting arrested, which I'm not going to go into the details of because it doesn't really matter for this video. But what does matter is that, like with the Mysterion trilogy, Kenny is a hero here. And this time he doesn't even use his reincarnation powers to save the day. He just gets done by being clever, which kind of makes him even more of a badass, honestly. So I think you can see why I call this Kenny Mania, because not only does this era have a ton of Kenny-focused episodes across just 4 seasons, but those episodes do so much for pushing his character forward in a meaningful way, which is pretty tits. And by the way, I know I skipped ahead to season 15 because we were talking about Mysterion, but don't think I forgot about a certain season 14 episode that just so happens to be one of the funniest Kenny episodes in the whole show. So let's take a second to dial things back and talk about what it feels like to be poor and stupid.
Oh, it's so easy for you, isn't it, Kenny? I've had to become poor all on my own, you know? I wasn't born with a plastic spoon in my mouth. What?
Now, unlike all those heroic Mysterion episodes from season 14, this one's actually pretty standard fare as far as Kenny plots go. The basic premise here is that Cartman wants to be a pro NASCAR driver and believes that the only way to do it is by being as poor and stupid as possible, which really pisses off Kenny because he's a huge fan of NASCAR and can't stand how Cartman is ruining its reputation. But the twist here is that Kenny being poor is actually not the butt of the joke for once. If anything, we're meant to feel sympathetic towards him and how Cartman is making his life a living hell, especially when you see how much genuine enthusiasm he has for NASCAR.
Now who's ready for Saturday's big race?
Hey, Kenny! You love NASCAR, huh?
Yeah, it's very cute and pure. But the cool thing is that, unlike many of the Kenny side plots from the early years, he actually gets a lot of agency here. He continuously tries to stop Cartman from ruining the sport, even bringing a gun to the race in hopes of taking out his car. He jumps on the car at one point, mid-race, which is pretty crazy. And there are just so many jokes here that rely on Kenny's reactions to deliver the humor, which is so different from how they used to write Kenny. It used to be that we exclusively understood Kenny through the way the other characters reacted to him. But now we've reached a point where the humor predominantly comes from him reacting to other characters. And that just goes to show how in this era of the show, Kenny is written more like a main character than he ever was before. Like, they just completely changed their approach to him in general. And that's really the hallmark of this era and why I call it Kenny Mania. Because not only did we get Mysterion, not only did it solidify Kenny's hero position, not only did we get more Kenny episodes in this period in general than any other period in the show, but it was instrumental in redefining how both the audience and the writers perceived Kenny. It changed him forever, and the momentum that it created was so strong that it formed an entirely new era for his character, an era that I like to call the post-Mania years.
Kenny, your girlfriend is a notorious whore.
Okay guys, listen. Can I just take a second to say something here? Holy shit, this is a lot of Kenny. Do you guys realize that we're like 60 pages into my script right now? That's nuts. My brain is like 100% Kenny now. I'm seeing him everywhere I look, on the face of every child, on the smile of every baby, and especially in season 16's Going Native.
You're all fake and stuck up, and none of you have the courage to tell Jimmy that his jokes aren't funny. The only kid here with any sense of dignity is Kenny, and the rest of you have your heads up your butts.
Now, I think we can all agree that by this point in the show, after everything we'd seen, the fans knew that Kenny was awesome. We respected him in a new way. But this episode was the first time that those sentiments about Kenny were reflected by the actual characters of the show. Because when Butters says that Kenny is the only one with any decency, it hits kind of different now. We're more inclined to agree with that in season 16 than ever before, especially since characters like Stan and Kyle were no longer as perfect and infallible as they once were. They'd been knocked down a peg or two by moments of selfishness and ego. So the idea that Butters, the kid with the biggest heart in the show, sees Kenny as the only good one left, that has extra weight to it. And the best part is that in this episode, Kenny absolutely lives up to it. I mean, seriously, dude does everything for Butters. He gets him on the plane, takes him to Hawaii, accompanies him everywhere he goes. Kenny just does whatever he can to make Butters feel better because he can't stand to see him suffer through the pain. And when Butters meets the alcoholic Hawaii people and they go into crisis because they run out of Chi-Chis in the middle of some dumb conflict they're stuck in, Kenny is the one who saves the day. And he does it in badass Hawaii style by bringing them, sustenance that they need to win their fight. Okay, look, I admit it, it's pretty stupid. The entire thing is ridiculous. But you can't deny that Kenny comes through anyway, because he's just awesome like that. And you'll see what I mean as the seasons go by, but from this point forward, there's this vibe that Kenny is universally seen as good by the people in the show. Like from this point onwards, the town celebrates Kenny. He's shown more respect by the other characters, and the writing is very on the nose about it. I mean, hell, the Hawaii episode practically shouts it through Butters. And to me, it feels like this was Trey and Matt's way of responding to how fans positively reacted to the Mysterion stuff. They saw that Kenny was becoming a fan favorite, and so they started making him into a favorite amongst his peers. Though, having said that, they still managed to be pretty balanced with the approach to his character. Like, Kenny doesn't just exclusively become this perfect hero kid, he's still very much the Kenny we've always known and loved. In fact, you could even say that he's quirkier than ever now. Like how in that Hawaii episode, he was writing letters to the boys in ye olde English for some reason.
He still seems quite angry at times, but luckily, his ceremony will finally take place on the morrow.
On the morrow? What the is wrong with Kenny?
I like to pretend that that was a spiritual successor to the letters that Cartman was sending in Red Badge of Gayness. Anyway, season 16 also includes that one episode that everyone totally universally loves, where the boys go ziplining, and one of its main running jokes is that Kenny is constantly being ripped on for having herpes. We even get to see this gross live-action version of him, which is kinda neat. Which just goes to show that even after all these great moments, even when Kenny is the most praised character on the show, his classic traits still manage to shine through. They always manage to shine through, which just harkens back to that comment I made all the way back at the beginning of this video about how Trey and Matt have always been consistent. But yeah, that's kind of what I mean when I say that they struck a really good balance here with Kenny's character. Like, he's definitely the awesome heroic one now, but he's very multifaceted too. In fact, if anything, I'd say that what this era really adds to his character is that it rounds him out. We get more goofy Kenny moments, and we learn more about his interests and desires. Like how in season 17, we were introduced to Her Majesty, Princess Zucchini. Yeah, who could forget that time that Kenny was a chick from one of the show's best trilogies? Now, if I'm being honest, unlike with Mysterion, I don't think there's as much to get out of analyzing this persona, but I do love the idea of Princess Zucchini as a character. And yes, I have to keep saying it like that. I have a rare bone disease that makes me have to keep saying it like that. Now, I think it makes sense that Kenny would want to LARP as royalty, given that he's so used to being the poor kid in town, so it's a nice bit of escapism for him. It shows a desire to break from his identity a bit. And that's not even mentioning the fact that it also means he doesn't have to be the hero for once, because, you know, princesses don't do the saving, they get saved. So in a way, you could view this role as a nice little break from his usual life of being the poor kid who has to help everyone. But more than anything, I feel like Princess Zucchini also highlights his quirky side, because most of the boys at school wouldn't be willing to dress up as a girl, aside from maybe Cartman and like that time that Butters, Pip, and Dougie did it to play Charlie's Angels, and I guess Margarine. So I like that it implies that Kenny is maybe more comfortable with himself than the average boy, or that he's just more willing to mix it up than the others. But also, while we're on the subject, I gotta say, I love the way they repurposed his resurrection superpower for this bit, because it may not fit with the lore of the show, but this anime sequence is legendary. Now, in my opinion, the experimentation we see with this era of Kenny's personality actually mirrors what we saw in season 4. Only this time, it's spread across multiple seasons instead of being jam-packed into one. Because not only do we get stuff like the Old English letters and Princess Zucchini, but we also get one of my favorite examples, season 18's Cock Magic, which is the episode where we learn that Kenny is apparently amazing at Magic the Gathering. Now, truthfully, this episode isn't actually that focused on Kenny. If anything, it's mostly about roosters playing Magic against each other, and also Randy doing his version of Cock Magic. But I love this idea that Kenny has a talent for the game, especially since it lines up with how good he was at that Heaven vs. Hell PSP game. Kinda suggests that Kenny has a knack for strategy or games or something. This episode is also the first time in a while that we see Cartman's soft spot for Kenny, which seemed to largely fall to the wayside after Best Friends Forever, because throughout this entire episode, Cartman seems extremely invested in seeing Kenny smile and feel good. He's always checking in on him, you know? Stuff like making sure he's not feeling butthurt when the boys are looking for a new rooster to enter into the Cock Magic tournament.
Guys, I think maybe Kenny's a little hurt because he was the big Magic champion and now chickens are stealing his thunder.
No.
A little bit?
No.
This is a weirdly cute moment for Cartman that shows a side of him that we really haven't seen since like I don't know, season 2? And I like that it's his special bond with Kenny that brings it out of him, that he still sees Kenny as his best friend, even after the savage comments that Kenny made in his will. Also, it's worth noting that in the Magic Bush episode, where Butters lets Cartman fly his dad's drone, Cartman says he won't tell anyone about it, but ends up bringing Kenny along anyways, which just once again shows his preference for Kenny's company. Now, as you may have noticed, almost every big Kenny moment in this era so far is attached to some other story. He goes to Hawaii for Butters. He becomes a princess for the role-playing game. He plays Magic on the boys team. So these all showcase Kenny's personality in some way, but they don't really put him in a proper lead role. But in season 19, we finally get a Kenny story that focuses on him. And it may not be the main subject of the episode, but it's a story that's all his own. And it's one of his sweetest in the entire show.
Mommy, can we go eat outside?
No, we can't go eat outside.
But Mommy, they have ice cream.
We can't afford $10 ice cream, all right? If you want nice things, then go out and get a job.
Yeah, that clip doesn't exactly match the setup I gave, I know, but I'm trying to establish something here, so just chill your tits for a second, okay? Now in this episode, South Park wants to get a Whole Foods, which means that they have to gentrify the town, which they do by adding a bunch of lofts and restaurants outside of Kenny's house, aka the poor part of town. And as hilarious as this is, with the soft-spoken ads showing off the neighborhood, while Kenny's family looks absolutely pissed off, it's actually a very sad episode, because as you saw in that clip, Kenny's little sister doesn't understand why they can't go outside and get ice cream like everyone else. And to make matters worse, Stuart is a huge asshole here and he yells at her until she cries. Now, not only does this anger Kenny, but it motivates him to get a job of his own so that he can be better than his deadbeat dad who doesn't make enough money to support the family. And throughout this episode, we see that Kenny works super hard at City Walk to make that money. He's shown to be a great employee, he never protests, and Mr. Lou Kim even takes a special liking to him, despite the fact that it keeps calling him Dennis. Now, the two of them work really hard to make City Walk successful after the new restaurants in town have stolen all their business. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out. Nobody really cares about City Walk, and eventually they both give up, leaving Kenny with just a handful of dollars for all the work that he did. Man, to make matters worse, when he gets home after work, Stuart is up late watching TV and rubs it in Kenny's face that working hard made no difference. They're still poor, they're always gonna be poor, so why bother trying at all? It's a really bitter moment that simultaneously makes you hate Kenny's dad, but also makes you pity all of them for how crappy their situation is. But then, out of nowhere, Kenny walks into his sister's room and does the most heartwarming thing that has ever happened in this entire goddamn show. He gives her a present that he was able to buy with the money that he made working at City Walk.
Wow. This is mine?
I'm not crying, you're crying. Actually, wait, I am crying, and so are you, because it's the goddamn sweetest thing you've ever seen. She's so happy to get that doll. It's such a simple gesture that goes such a long way, and it's just so beautiful that Kenny went out of his way to work as hard as he could to give her that positive memory. It's clear that he wants her life to be better than his. He wants to protect her from the bitter world that she was born into. Let her continue to be an innocent kid for just a little bit longer. And that is just too beautiful, man. But then, just when you think the episode can't hit you any harder, you find out that this isn't even the ending yet, because right after Karen gets her new doll, we follow Kenny as he leaves his sister's room, goes back to bed, and tries to fall asleep, while the music from the restaurants outside blasts through his walls, showing that while Kenny was able to shield his sister from the cruelty of the world for just a little longer, there is no escape from reality for him. There honestly couldn't be a more appropriate episode to end off this era of the show for Kenny, because it's kind of the perfect mix of old and new, but with a serious spin. We see the realities of how poverty has affected Kenny's family, how nobody cares that they're against Soto Sopa, or that it's gonna make their lives worse. Everybody just ignores them and laughs at them, like how Cartman is quick to call them country bumpkins. But it also puts Kenny's altruistic and heroic side on full display. He's hardworking, he fights back, and he does everything he can to make Karen's life just a little bit better, which is the natural evolution of what blossomed back in The Poor Kid, where he donned his Mysterion persona to help her. Only here, he doesn't need a cape to be a hero, he just is one, just like he was to Butters back at the start of this era. And that dynamic is one of the most powerful things that the show has ever done. So if Kenny Mania was the period that changed how we saw him, this was the period that cemented it, that gave everyone in town a reason to love Kenny just as much as the fans do. And it showed us that he doesn't need the Mysterion costume to act like a hero, because he also has a sweet ninja costume. Pat yourselves on the backs, guys. You did it. You made it to the final era of Kenny and the last section of this video. Good job. Good job. You just proved that you're a real certified Kenny fan. A certificate that you could only get from watching this video for however many minutes it's been so far. Yeah, that's how you prove you're a Kenny fan. You contribute to my watch time. Nah, but as Kenny fans, I'm sure that you all know about the modern era. After all, this is the era that we're currently in today, and it all starts with season 20. You wanna know what's so funny about season 20? Nothing, that season sucked. Nah, I'm just kidding. Season 20 is overhated. But the reason that it starts off the modern era of Kenny is because it doesn't have any Kenny episodes at all. Yeah, Kenny is like basically not in this season. Like honestly, I think the only notable thing he does in the entire 20th season is join Butters in his balls out protest against the girls. And that's not even something that's unique to him. Most of the other boys were doing it too. Now, season 20 is a bit of a unique season for the show because there's a big overarching story happening throughout the entire thing. It covers the election, Gerald as Skank Hunt, Troll Trace, Memberberries. It's a very big and ambitious project that didn't exactly make room for every aspect of the show. So it's kind of understandable that Kenny took a back seat here because, well, there was just too much going on already. But sadly, this season also marks the beginning of a trend for Kenny, because from this point forward, he almost never gets his own episodes anymore. He's mostly reverted back to being a secondary sidekick character again. Like season 20, no Kenny episodes. Season 21, nothing. Season 23, nothing. Season 25, nothing. There's not a single Kenny storyline in any of those seasons. Like, Christ, man, what is this? The post-death years? It honestly feels kind of crazy to have so little Kenny content after all the great stuff we got over the last two eras. And I'm honestly tempted to say that this era is worse for Kenny than the post-death years were. But at the same time, while there may be more seasons overall without Kenny storylines, the ones we do get are actually a pretty big deal. Much bigger than something like Best Friends Forever was, in my opinion. And that all starts with one of my favorite Halloween specials, the Scoots.
Kenny, we've been talking, and the truth is, without a scooter, you're just gonna slow us down.
It's probably best you trick-or-treats with someone else this year.
The Scoots is a pretty big episode for Kenny because, well, our boy got himself a Halloween special. Yeah, take that, tweak, who is unrelated to my previous sentence in every way possible. The basic idea is that these e-scooters are popping up all over town, and the kids are all planning to use them for trick-or-treating, because that way they'll be able to hit up more houses and get more candy. However, Kenny doesn't have a phone, so he can't use the e-scooters, and that leads to him being excluded from everyone's trick-or-treating groups, which totally sucks and is not fair. I mean, you can't screw over kids on Halloween like that. It's sacred. That's just messed up, man. But anyways, because Kenny and Mackie both hate the scooters, they team up to take them down, which leads to this very dope sequence where Kenny and Mackie drive through a swarm of scooters to reach the cell tower. And once there, Kenny climbs the entire thing to attach a tow hook to it, allowing for Mackie to bring the whole thing down with his car, thus making the scooters go offline. It's very epic and cool looking, especially with the fun silhouette animation gimmicks that they use. But the question I want to pose here is, should they have vandalized the tower just to get rid of the scooters? Because I mean, they definitely were getting out of hand in the episode, and the kids at school were all being selfish dicks to Kenny because of them. But at the same time, that's kind of just tough luck, right? Like if I was a kid, I'd also probably want to get as much candy as humanly possible. And taking out an entire cell tower probably wouldn't be justified by my Halloween woes, or even the annoying scooter people in the streets. So in that sense, I think that Kenny's motivations here are not exactly the best, but at the same time, you don't with the kids trick-or-treating, especially a poor kid like Kenny that could never usually afford that much candy. So for that reason, I'm personally willing to give him a pass for this one. Besides, Mr. Mackey seemed to think Kenny was on the right side. He even explicitly says it in a way that reminds me of how Butters praised Kenny in Going Native.
You're a good kid, Kenny. I always thought so. I know we kind of all forget about you sometimes, but you're smart, compassionate. You might even make a good counselor someday.
See? Remember when I said that the show now directly tells us that Kenny is awesome? Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I'm just gonna go outright and say it. This has gotta be one of the cutest Kenny episodes in the show. Cause like, can we be honest here? There are just so many moments that make Kenny seem adorable in this episode. The way he cheers when he gets his pumpkin candy pail. The way he asks the girls if he can join them for Halloween night this year. The way he says trick or treat at the end of the episode when he finally joins his friends. Like, I swear, they go out of their way to make Kenny feel as adorable and innocent as possible possible in this episode. Probably because it makes us more sympathetic to his Halloween struggles, which feels relatively minor compared to the tone of his other stories. But even though this story is largely inconsequential compared to those other episodes, he still gets to be a lead character here. He makes decisions that advance the plot. He's got a voiceover at the beginning and end of the episode, which is pretty cool. And as I mentioned in my Halloween ranking video, this episode has some of the most intelligible versions of Kenny's muffle that we've ever gotten. Like, you can pretty much understand almost everything he's saying here, which makes this episode feel extra special and unique for him. So yeah, it's definitely one of his strongest episodes to date in terms of agency and characterization. And that's why what really stands out to me about this period of the show is that even though Kenny is now mostly in the background once again, it's clear that they can bust out a good Kenny story whenever they want to. I guess because they have so much to fall back on now in terms of his personality and his history, that there's a clear level of comfortability that just wasn't there before. They know how to write for Kenny, and they know how to do it well. Though that's also why it makes me that much more annoyed that they haven't been doing it for the majority of this era, because honestly, The Scoots is the last conventional Kenny episode that we've gotten at the time of me making this video. I mean, there was Dickenbaus, which added to the pantheon of Cartman and Kenny friendship moments, but let's be real, he didn't have that much to do in that episode. He was definitely just along for the ride once again. Like, it was a good broship moment, but it was not good in terms of Kenny's prominence. And even if that changes with the final season 27/28 episode, which hasn't aired at the time of me making this, won't change the fact that we went through a 6-season stretch where Kenny has largely been relegated to the background. I mean, come on, given that they went through all that effort to turn him into such a badass, it really sucks that they've once again stopped focusing on him. Though I will say, we do get a sort of middle ground moment in seasons 24 and 25 with the vaccination and post-COVID specials, because both of those specials use Kenny as a point of focus. They aren't Kenny episodes, and the stories don't really follow him. Instead, they follow pretty much everyone else but Kenny, but he's important to their stories nonetheless, just in more of a prop kind of way, if you know what I mean. Like, take season 24, which is really just 2 specials back to back. The main story with the boys revolves around the fact that their friend group is falling apart. Stan, Kyle, and Cartman don't really like each other anymore, and they're just staying together for Kenny's sake. Like a couple that stays together for the kids, you know? It's all, here's your holiday, and hope you enjoy it this time, and so on. And one of the running gags throughout all of this is that the boys are literally treating Kenny like a child. They take this very infantilizing approach to communicating with him that strips him of all his agency.
Kenny, you want to go get on your iPad for a minute?
What? No, I want to hear this.
We need to talk for a second, Kenny. Look, I downloaded Madagascar 3. You want to watch with your 12 headphones?
Yeah, okay.
Now, I do like that the boys all want to keep Kenny in their lives. It resonates with how each of them has been shown to care deeply for Kenny throughout the show, but they're also undeniably being huge dickbags about it. I mean, they treat Kenny like he's an obligation, someone that has to be accounted for instead of an actual person, which is incredibly selfish. They're not really taking his feelings into account, they're only concerned with themselves. And that makes the whole ordeal feel like this huge step backwards for Kenny, because it essentially takes away all of his autonomy. He has no intentional influence on this breakup, even though he tries to protest it the few times they exclude him, so it almost feels like we're watching modern Kenny be forced into the old Kenny's role. He wants to have a voice, but the other boys won't let him. Though this is of course all just a setup for the post-COVID special where Kenny is dead. Yeah, that's right, they did it again. They took a page out of the season 6 playbook and gave Kenny a louder voice in death than in life. Except this time, that voice comes from the legacy he left behind and the messages he left for the other 3 boys. Because as it turns out, in the future, Kenny is a renowned scientist that accomplished many great things before he passed. He's well celebrated and loved by the world. He's a humanitarian, which feels like the natural extension of the way he helped people as a kid. And he even maintained his friendship with Butters, which isn't an accomplishment, but it says something about his loyalty. Plus, I just really enjoy that fact. But most importantly, Kenny somehow managed to build a functioning time machine before he passed, which he only did because he wanted to get his friends back.
He hopes you guys are watching this. He spent his whole life trying to fix your broship and then realized this was the only way because you guys suck.
Now, I think we could all agree that, with the exception of Cartman's life, the future represented in this special is pretty awful. Kyle is alone and miserable, Stan is also miserable and accidentally killed his mom and sister. It's all just very bleak. But when the boys hear Kenny's message, it has a profound effect on them. They realize that they were wrong to split up and that they should have doubled down on their friendship when they were still kids, which inspires them to use Kenny's time machine to go back in time and set things right. And they do. by blackmailing an 8-year-old girl into giving them front row basketball seats. Yeah, the way it goes down isn't the most important part. The important part is that thanks to the awesome experience that they have together, the boys decide to forgive each other and go back to being best friends again, which completely changes the future. Stan and Wendy end up getting together, his mom and his sister are still alive, Kyle and Ike are reunited. It's all around a much better timeline than what we previously saw. Well, except for Cartman's life. But Cartman having a bad life arguably is a good future, so my point still stands. But the real magic of it all is that once again, Kenny helped everyone from beyond the grave. Everything he did in that bad timeline is what led to this good timeline existing. So essentially, he saved everyone. Again, by sacrificing his life to test the time machine. So much like with Jubilee or the South Park movie, Kenny is once again saving the world by giving up his life. And that's just gotta prove that Kenny is one of the most important people in all of South Park. I mean, seriously though, dude is so powerful that he can correct timelines. That's crazy. He is the glue that holds the world together, and he's continuously proven himself to be the most selfless person in the entire show. Even more than Jesus. Even more than Butters. Yes, being better than Butters is more impressive than Jesus. You know it's true. But yeah, that's ultimately what makes him such an amazing character. Because despite the dark reality he has to live through, the poverty, the broken family, the horrifically torturous deaths, Kenny still ends up being this bright, shining light on the town of South Park. And time again, he saves his friends. He saves the world. He even saved heaven that one time. And that's why Kenny's evolution is one of the most important things to happen in this show. Because even though he started as an undeveloped gag character that lacked any sense of depth, he eventually became the hero. And that's why there is no South Park without Kenny. Remember when I said that that last section was going to be the final section of this video? Yeah, I lied. And to think you just believed me like a sucker. But seriously though, you might be wondering why I would possibly extend this video any longer, given that it's been like 7 hours straight of me talking about Kenny now. Or at least that's how long I assume this thing will be. Because you know, these words were written by Past Slush, who hasn't done the voice recording yet. So the math might be a little off, because you know, Past Slush, he's a real asshole. Anyways, let me tell you something. This section isn't going to be about an episode or a season or even an era of Kenny's character. This is about something far more specific. This is about the importance of silence on the evolution of Kenny. Yeah, silence. And I don't mean a lack of sound, but rather a lack of words. Because as we all know, Kenny is the boy whose speech is muffled. We usually can't understand what he's saying, it's unintelligible. And that's always been a pretty fundamental aspect of his character. But I believe that it's not just a feature, it's essential to why he developed the way he did. Silence was instrumental to why Kenny became one of the most liked people in town. And in my opinion, it's also the driving factor behind why he became a fan favorite as the years have gone by. And that all starts with the nature of the show itself. Because I think we can all agree that if there's one thing that South Park is known for, it's stupid, annoying people. Yes, South Park is a show that highlights the stupidity of our world through characters who are really dumb. Whether it's celebrities, politicians, or even just the people around town, this is a show that's full of idiots and assholes. People are always being hypocritical, selfish, childish, and at one point or another, almost everyone in this show acts like a big, dumb, annoying dick. Even Butters has moments where he's acted like an asshole in recent seasons. But you know who doesn't say stupid stuff that makes them less likable? Kenny. Because Kenny doesn't say anything at all. At least not that we can understand for the most part. And when you have a character like that, a character that never really steps into the spotlight the way everyone else does, that immediately sets him apart in the best way possible. Because his lack of words save him from exhibiting the same kinds of flaws that the other characters are saddled with. And that's because with fewer words comes a smaller ego. You can see exactly how this works with the other three boys. Stan is cool, but he can be kind of full of himself sometimes, which is why he hijacks movements for his own glory in episodes like Butterballs with the anti-bullying stuff, a Scars for Applause when he accidentally starts a social movement. Even the South Park Sucks Now stuff kind of fits here. In other words, he's kind of up his own ass sometimes. And then there's Kyle, who's usually pretty good about being the smart, moral one, but sometimes he takes that too far. Sometimes he thinks he knows best and feels the need to lecture everybody, which can make him very preachy and insufferable. And then of course there's Cartman, who is Cartman, a kid so bad that he's pretty much a verb for committing an act of psychopathic evil. You know, like, oh no, I heard that poor man got Cartmaned and hasn't been the same since. The point is that all three of them can be kind of shitty sometimes, and it's pretty much always an ego thing. They don't like being criticized or proven wrong or diminished, and you could apply this logic to almost every character on the show. In fact, it's almost always at the root of the people they parody, because South Park is a show that likes to tear down big egos. But the one character that this basically almost never applies to is Kenny. Because as a person of few words, Kenny is automatically less critical of people, less preachy, less self-indulgent. He's used to not being in the spotlight, and he's okay with it. He's a character that did a lot of his development in the background of the show, and he's evolved to have a smaller ego because of it. And this all means that, by default, there's less to dislike about Kenny because he's rarely ever the butt of the joke. I mean, they make jokes at his expense for being poor or a horny degenerate, stuff like that, but he's never the joke of an episode in the way that the other boys could be or a celebrity might be, because his flaws are always less of an indictment on his personality. If anything, it feels like Kenny is just happily and innocently enjoying himself as stuff goes down. Like dancing Kenny. So cute. So pure. Also, this is a big part of why Mysterion feels like a completely different character from the Kenny we see otherwise. Because being voiceless is integral to his identity, and giving him one completely shifts our perceptions of him. It makes him feel like a different person. When Kenny's Mysterion, he's commanding. He puts himself in the spotlight. He leads the way. And he's awesome, but he doesn't read like the Kenny we're used to. Because the Kenny we're used to is usually in the background, in a more supportive role. He's letting others speak, going along with their plans and ideas. So when you put the two together, a bunch of big egos with a quiet kid that's happy to go with the flow, it's only natural that these characters all end up liking Kenny. And obviously starting in that position is why he became such a hero. Because from a writing perspective, it's a very natural progression to make. The quiet and expendable kid ends up becoming the helpful kid, and the helpful kid ends up becoming the selfless kid, and then ultimately the selfless kid ends up becoming a hero. And that's the exact progression that Kenny followed. He went from a quiet kid to a hero that saved the world multiple times over. But because of his silence, Kenny is usually a thankless hero. He doesn't ask for praise, he just does what he needs to do. And I think that when you combine those characteristics with the fact that Kenny has done some really heartwarming, badass throughout the show, it's no surprise that he's become the fan favorite. He's simply too good, a savior that needs no reward. So ultimately, the reason that we all love Kenny today is because in the world of South Park, a world that punishes the selfish and the loud, Kenny took a different path. A path that started with silence and ended with Kenny becoming the soul of South Park.